Good afternoon and welcome. This is Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont Senate, here on Tuesday the 24th to give some updates on Vermont's effort to combat the COVID-19 virus. I'm going to talk about a few things today. Most important on many people's minds will be what's being called the stay-home order, which is being issued literally as we speak. And I'm going to spend some time talking to you about what is in that order so people can understand how it affects our day-to-day lives. So just to repeat, the governor is issuing what he's calling a stay-home order, and I'll provide some detail and we'll read a little bit from the order in a second so that people can understand what that's going to mean. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Senate action today and what that represents and doesn't represent. The Senate was in session today and provide to take some action to do some immediate things to help both the healthcare sector provide services that are badly needed right now, but also help laid off workers and the businesses who employ them. So I'm going to probably wrap with maybe a description of what I see are the big challenges ahead facing the state of Vermont in the months ahead with what we know at the time. So let me just cut right to the chase and begin by saying that just about a few minutes ago I learned that there will be a formal stay-home order issued by the governor. You can go to the governor's website and you will see exactly what it means, but I'm going to read a little bit. I don't think it'll make the most exciting video, but I think for the moment, since I have access to it, you'll appreciate hearing it. And it goes like this. I'll skip about a little bit so I get to what I think are the high points. After a lot of verbiage explaining why there would be a stay-home order, it gets to the heart of the matter, which is the specific directives that the governor is issuing and which we are all obligated to follow. It says to preserve the public health and safety, to ensure the healthcare delivery system is capable of serving all, and to help protect those at the highest risk and vulnerability. Vermonters are directed to stay home or in their place of residence, leaving only for essential reasons such as personal safety, groceries or medicine, curbside pickup of foods, meals or beverages, medical care, exercise, care of others, and work, which is laid out a little bit lower. So that's an expansion of the directive for people to stay at home, to be almost all-inclusive except the basic things that sustain us and keep us alive. The encouragement for most businesses to stop any customer walk-up kind of activity is a secondary piece, but let me cut to the chase of people who are not under the stay-home order as far as work goes. So this is, again, the governor's executive order. The governor's team have been trying, I think, in the days leading up to now to ease the state into a stay-home order because the moment you issue an order with some exemptions, many people say, does that exemption apply to me? And it can be more chaotic than not having issued the order in the first place. So right now, the services or functions in Vermont deemed critical to public health and safety, as well as economic and national security, include, and those were all words from the governor's order, healthcare operations. I won't go into the long list of things that are described as healthcare operations, but they include obvious things like testing, hospital personnel, other health providers, public health workers, lab services, and all of the support structure that is around the people directly delivering health services. Law enforcement, public safety, and first responders, including fire, ambulance, EMT, and all of that. Critical infrastructure, meaning the utility companies, telecom companies, airports, transportation infrastructure. Construction necessary to support our response and to maintain critical infrastructure. If, for instance, a bridge was faltering, it would allow someone to go out and do that work. To catch up those who are just joining, I'm talking about the governor's just released stay-home order. So I've explained some of the groups that are exempt from the stay-home work order. Critical manufacturing, described as including food and animal feed manufacturing, processing and supply, pharmaceuticals, and other activities necessary to support the COVID-19 response. Retail serving basic human needs such as grocery, pharmacy, other retail that sells food, beverage, animal feed, and essential supplies, although they are all encouraged to do as much curbside and online curbside delivery and pickup and as much telephone and online ordering as possible. Fuel products and supply, hardware stores, but again, encouraging people to call in their orders in advance so they can pick it up at the curb. Transportation sector and ag sector equipment parts, repair. This would include auto garages, being able to continue to work on vehicles to keep them safe as they're on the roads. Trash collection and disposal, recycling and so on, maintenance of drinking water, wastewater. Agriculture and farms, animal shelters, which was important. I know that members of humane societies across the state reached out to me, so I advocated that they be included. Otherwise, the animals are there without anyone to care for them. Lodging, to the extent required to support COVID-19 response. Other building and property services for safety and sanitation and operations. So if you are a housing organization or you own rental properties, you would be able to continue to care for the properties and make sure that people are living in a good environment. Mail and shipping services, obviously USPS, which we do not control, but UPS, FedEx, and so on. News media, almost every jurisdiction that has issued a stay-home order has allowed news media to stay open so we can be monitoring what the government's doing. Banks and financial institutions, although they're pushing as much to be automated or through drive-through and online services. And then here's a key one. I've received many questions from people who've been viewing this daily video about homeless shelters, community action agencies that do food distribution, a whole variety of agencies that if not for them, people would not get their very basic needs met. And so one of the exemptions from the stay-at-home order that's being issued today is what's called providers of necessities and services to economically disadvantaged populations. That is a broad definition, but in some ways is good. It means that those who are absolutely critical to meeting people's human needs will be able to continue to do so long as it's being done in a safe environment. I also want to say I've heard from some people who work at organizations that assist people who have been impacted by domestic violence and sexual assault. Right after I read through this the first time, I said, well, why aren't these people who work either in offices or shelters included? I was told that their intent is that services to economically disadvantaged populations was meant to include people who've been impacted by domestic violence or sexual assault. So if you're watching and you work for such an organization, know that this is meant to include you, even if it's not so obvious at first. And then what's described as other vendors of technical, security, logistics, and custodial equipment support and repair as it relates to the COVID-19 response. So some have argued that we should have a stay-at-home order earlier. Others have said that they don't want to see it. But one way or the other, right now, the governor has issued what he's calling a stay-home order. And you can go to the governor's website. If you Google Governor Vermont, you will see the executive order. My guess is that between now and this time tomorrow, I will receive many questions from businesses and individuals asking, and organizations, if it applies to them in their unique situation. There may not be immediate clarity, and so feel free to ask me, and I will try to tally up the ones I get, reach out to the governor's office, and see if we can provide more guidance. So that is sort of the breaking news at the moment, is that it's called Stay Home, Stay Safe. So whatever you want to call it, it has the same effect. What this means now is that Vermont is probably, in some ways, gone beyond the so-called stay-at-home orders in other states, where they've created the stay-at-home order, but then you look at the images on TV and people are all congregating in group settings everywhere you turn. So Vermont has generally been much better, I think, than most states in terms of people understanding social distancing. With this new stay-home order, it obviously takes it to the next level. So please let me know if you work at an organization that is worried about where you fit into this, or if you do. It's obviously going to add to a lot of confusion for some, so we'll have to work through that in the coming days. I do want to say a word about why this is so important. And I see that there is a link now to the stay-home order. So anyone who's watching right now, one of the commenters you'll see has posted the executive order, which I just read from in part, and I encourage you to look there and see how we are, as a state, going to be expected to conduct ourselves for the coming days. I want to say a word about why this is so important. We now have 95 people who have tested positive for COVID-19. That's up a little more than 40 in just 2 days. We now have 7 deaths of people who were infected with COVID-19. And so we obviously are thinking about the people we've lost and their families and the communities that they live in. And the reason why all this is so important is we want to keep those numbers as low as possible. And anybody who's seen all the charts online knows that this is what appears to be the beginning of the story, not the end. So I've been really having to reflect on the part of state government that right now we have taken some immediate measures to try to address people's health and safety needs, and also some of their income support needs through unemployment. But it's really just the beginning. To put it in perspective, the jurisdictions which have had real community spread and outbreaks have had their hospitals get essentially deluged with patients. Right now, all of our hospitals are trying to free up as much space and personnel and supplies as possible in case there is a surge. Just about an hour ago, I concluded a meeting that I conduct every day at 4 with House and Senate leadership that I chair, and we had the executive director of the Association of Vermont Hospitals on. We asked very specifically if he believed that the hospitals were ready, each of the hospitals, and bear in mind that UVM Medical Center and Rutland and maybe Central Vermont are much bigger than many of our small community hospitals. Are they ready at all across the state for a surge in patients? The answer that we heard from the executive director was they're as prepared as they can be for this moment, meaning there are things in their control which they feel like they've got a good handle on in terms of policies and protocols, staffing, readiness. They are now in part subject to both the outbreak itself and just how high the numbers go, also the supplies that come to them largely at this point from the federal government and whether they'll be sufficient. So I think we all have to put into perspective what's going on and the kind of community sacrifice that is being made to protect people's lives. I was on the Senate floor today and said that, we have some people saying, is it really worth it to have such a shock to the economy? And it makes us all ask a very basic question. What are we willing to pay to save one life, 2, 5, 10, 20, 100, 1,000? On a state level, you can talk about it on a national level. And I think we each would put a very, very high value on our own life, our partners' lives, our family members' lives, our friends. And we have to respect that all across the state right now, there are other people, many of whom we've never met and never will meet, who each also place a very high value on the life of their friends and family. And so in the interest of public health, we've made a collective decision that we do not want thousands of people to die if it's preventable, and that we're willing to take these measures. But unquestionably, it is going to require a tremendous amount of sacrifice collectively, a lot of solidarity as a society to be willing to make these changes for the time being to get to the other side of it. Some of the financial ones, I mean, I'm thinking health and safety first. I think that has to be our top priority. When we talk about the economy, which is how people are feeling it more immediately, those who are not infected, I just want to put in perspective a couple quick issues. One, I have mentioned in previous updates that the state is likely to see a shortfall of more than $100 million just for the next 3 months, which is a number and a decline of revenues that probably is the fastest in Vermont history. Even in the Great Recession, it took many, many, many months to really dig the kind of hole we've just had in 1 week. But yesterday, as I mentioned, the governor and his tax department allowed for those businesses who collect rooms and meals tax to not have to submit their next 2 payments so that they could hold on to the money and possibly use it to stay afloat so they can get to the other side of this crisis. And the restaurant industry was advocating very strongly for that. That works out to be about $20 million that if they don't pay it, the state will not collect in the next 3 months. So that adds 20 more million to the 100 we're already short. In addition to extending the rooms and meals tax payment period, allowing restaurants to hold on to their meals tax a little bit longer so they can use it for other purposes, the same waiver was given for sales and use tax. I had not heard a significant amount of advocacy to be able to hold on to that, but that was granted as well. Now, if every retail shop across the state, large and small, kept the money they've collected from customers, the 6% or 7%, depending on which town you're in, and did not submit it till after July 1st, that would add another $102 million hole for the current fiscal year just for the next 3 months. So you can see the math getting overwhelming right out of the gates. That would be more than $200 million that we would be short just for a 3-month window of time, which is a rate of decline that is I couldn't have ever imagined I'd be talking about right now. We have built up what we call a rainy day fund. I see a question about that. Our rainy day fund, which we have really, really prioritized starting to grow, is nowhere near enough to cover the kind of losses we're talking about. And so federal support at this point is going to be absolutely critical. Let me talk a little bit about the Senate action we took. We had a very unusual action today in Montpelier. We had a Senate chamber where people weren't sitting in their normal seats so we could have more distancing. We had asked only those senators who could most easily make it to attend, and we told others that if you don't need to be there, we'd probably prefer you not show up this time. The reason we did that is because what we voted on today were all consensus items. We had no disagreement in the Senate on the package of items we voted on today. So if one person was absent, it was not because they didn't want to participate, not that they couldn't be there, but rather in the interest of only having the smallest number of people possible, they volunteered to not come in, but we knew that their vote would have been in the affirmative. I won't get into a deep technical discussion of what we voted on. The legislation, if you try and read it, it'll probably put you to sleep. But I'll just explain in summary terms what we tried to achieve. First, we tried to keep local government operational. We had to make changes in order to allow local governments to continue to meet without violating state law. We also have ordered that all school board and select board meetings that are held remotely have to be recorded so that those in the community who are not able to participate in real time using either the internet or a phone or whatever, or local cable, can follow back up afterwards and see the meetings. We allowed for the timely and safe conduct of elections at the state and local level. Many communities have particular challenges where they have to vote soon, whether it's on municipal bond votes or revotes on their school budget, and needed a change in the law to allow them to proceed without violating their own charters and other statutes. We also made some changes at the state level to make sure that if measures need to be taken, especially for the August primary, related to more safe approaches using more mail ballots or things like that, that the governor and the Secretary of State could jointly agree on changing some of the procedures. We are not talking about making it harder to vote. We are talking about ensuring that the vote can go forward, because it's very critical to many of us that government continue to run and meet the needs of people, and that we do not let the virus get in the way of the basic structures of our society. The reason we have the Secretary of State and the Governor jointly agreeing on any changes is because our Secretary of State happens to be a Democrat. We thought it was appropriate to pair him with someone who happens to be a Republican, so that there will be no sense that any of the changes being made are to advantage one political party or another. We provided flexibility to increase the number of providers who can provide medical care in the short term. We know that there are people who may be from other states, who are retired or whatever, who we may need to call on to provide additional capacity to meet people's needs in the days ahead. We provided additional flexibility to hospitals and health facilities and community providers to stay afloat financially, so that they could bill for certain services that they normally couldn't, and to get cash flowing to them at a time when they've stopped doing many of the bread and butter services that they normally get paid for. Most of the hospitals have been clearing the deck of virtually everything except for emergency care, so they're ready for patients to come in if there's a surge in their community. So we need to make sure they have dollars to keep the lights on, especially when we know some of them have been struggling so bad anyways. We've provided flexibility to provide more services more safely using telehealth and telemedicine, which we think is really important. We are providing quicker unemployment benefits to more people who are out of work as a result of the COVID-19 virus, more even than what the federal government permitted. We provided relief for the businesses who employ people who are out of work. Instead of facing penalties for laying people off, which is the normal way our unemployment system works, this will effectively hold employers harmless if they've had to lay people off as a result of this public health crisis. And finally, we provided flexibility to keep our roads safe. The DMV has effectively shut down for normal customers, and yet people need to be on the road for some of the purposes which are allowed even under the stay-home order. And so we allowed 90-day extensions of virtually every license, permit, or operating document used by normal motorists or truckers, so that we have a 90-day window where people can continue to operate lawfully while we get to the other side of this. I hope it's within 90 days. I can't say that that's true. And then we made one final provision, and this might seem rather dark, but we made a change to allow a easier and yet secure way of notarizing changes to wills. Because this virus is particularly problematic for older Vermonters, there are a number of people who are looking at their wills and wanting to make sure that their affairs are in order in the case that their health takes a turn. But right now, under existing law, there would have had to be visits to the courthouse in order to get certain things, certain documents and changes allowed. Obviously, with the courts closed, that's impossible, so we created an emergency provision to have secure video-based notarizing to allow people to get, plan their affairs in case of the worst outcome for themselves. So that's what we did, and I want to kind of say what that represents. Today, when we gathered in the Senate chamber, for those of you who haven't been there, once all this stuff clears out, I hope you will come and see us in action. It's very traditional. There's no microphones. We speak just like I'm speaking to you with no amp. And no one can have electronics in the chamber, so it's really analog. It's like it probably was 200 years ago, except without the spittoons, I should say. But for us, this was a very small hurdle to get over, and yet it was a long week to get to the point where we could take the actions I just described. So when we cast a vote on all of the provisions I just described to you, there was a sense of relief that we were able to get over that first hurdle. What I now know is going to be the case is that it is just the very, very first of many steps we're going to have to take in the coming months. And I say this not to be alarmist or dark, although sometimes my personality veers to the dark, but rather to say that in the months ahead, there are going to be much more substantial actions we're going to have to take. When this year's budget is down $100 million or more, it's probably more like $200 million, we are going to have to make very rapid and flexible decisions for the next 3 months. And with the federal government, if they do not come in with the kind of resources we need, the options facing government are not that complicated, and there's not a wide range of conceptual options. You raise taxes or fees or money from people in Vermont, you cut services, or you do something in between. And we'll have to see what the federal government provides to see what tactics might be on the table in order to get us through this. But unquestionably, the scale of this crisis is not something we've seen before. The state of Vermont alone cannot get itself out of it. So we're going to have a huge challenge there. Then, moving forward, normally the legislature passes its budget at the end of April and is ready to send it to the governor at the beginning of May. Well, I am 100% certain that as late as the end of May, we are going to have no idea how much money we have for the next state budget. We are going to have no idea what the federal government has done in total to meet our needs, and we're not going to know what the grand total costs have been across our state to meet these needs. Hospitals are just the beginning of the story in terms of how much money is going to be spent in order to meet the urgent crisis need that they're going to that they will apply themselves to without thinking about cost first. They're going to save people's lives, then deal with the cost. Community agencies all over the state are stepping up to perform services to get people in isolation areas, to provide people needed treatment in settings which they're not accustomed to. I spoke to one director of a homeless shelter who they're now operating out of a motel. They believe they're going to need more. They have fronted the money, hoping they get it back in the end. And then play this story out all over the state, and you'll know kind of the scale. That's just on the basic human services side. Then, of course, we've got all the independent contractors and self-employed and sole proprietors who might be able to get partial relief from the federal legislation, and we're advocating strongly for a federal program of giving unemployment directly to individuals who are self-employed with 100% federal share, so that we don't have to starve our unemployment trust fund that we have in Vermont. We need to see what the federal government's going to do to step up there. Businesses throughout the state who are suffering very badly, and it's going to take them time to rebuild and regroup to get on the other side of this. So there are so many huge challenges in just the next few months to even start to wrap our heads around that. I believe the legislature, it will not be meeting in the same way it has historically. We won't be in the State House. We will not be there every day. We might not be doing committee meetings remotely every day or in some weeks even. But I believe that we will not be able to pass a coherent, well-informed budget possibly until maybe early summer, even possibly into the fall. So what that means for a state that has a July 1st budget year is that we would start perhaps with a 3-month budget where we know we can pay the basic bills for 3 months, and then use that time as we've got all the best information coming to pass a full year budget that is that's more realistic. Frankly, almost all the work the legislature had done prior to the outbreak of this virus has been made irrelevant. I'm speaking specifically to financial legislation because everything has been shot out of the water on this thing. It's just unbelievable. So I think I'm nearing my my wrap for the day, and I know there are questions coming up about rent freeze, mortgage foreclosure freeze. I am going to be talking with the governor's team this week about what we can do there. I know there are renters who face end of month payment time for many of them right now. I know that there are landlords who, for them, they got to pay the mortgage so that they're in between. And then you've got people who might not have a mortgage and their tenants are starting to struggle to pay rent. What happens to the landlord who wouldn't benefit from a mortgage foreclosure, but would suffer if they don't get rent payments. So trying to make sure that we're touching on meeting everybody's needs as much as possible. So my hope is tomorrow to have better understanding of the governor's executive order and some of the different professions who are allowed to continue to go to work under this new executive order. For those of you who are just joining, if you rewatch the video, you'll see my detailing of a number of the elements of the governor's just issued stay-home order. There's also a link to it that someone has helpfully posted. And I guess with that, I'm gonna conclude and say that today was actually the anniversary of my first year in the Senate on March 24th. I had voted on other things, but I voted that day along with a number of my peers to pass marriage equality. And I've mentioned in a Facebook post earlier this morning when I came upon the image from the Burlington Free Press that was really, I had taken some important votes in the 2.5 months I'd been in the Senate, but the marriage equality vote was the first time I felt that big, the weight of responsibility and the understanding of how important the legislative branch of government is to people's lives. And the difference then was that when you vote on most pieces of legislation, you have the whole debate, everyone weighs in, and then you cast your vote, and no matter which side wins, you say it's over, we move on. Today's vote on March 24th, 12 years later, in my last year in the Senate, is the first of many to come. I felt like it was the commencement of a long legislative journey that's ahead. So in the coming weeks, I wish it was just days or weeks, but in the coming months, we are going to have a tremendous number of hurdles to overcome. Today's first Senate vote is not the last word on our state's attempt to respond to this crisis. It was a digestible first batch of strategies to get more money in some people's pockets who are out of work, to make our health services system more able to meet people's needs. There will be much more legislation coming in the days ahead. I also want to say sometimes we in the legislature, I've been as guilty as anyone, we think we're the center of the universe while we're down in Montpelier. And people were talking about how hard it's been to do teleconferencing, and it has really been quite a week trying to do legislative work remotely. I know that I speak for every member of the Senate when we are completely in agreement across the board that whatever we felt was some hardship we had to endure pales in comparison to all the people who are having to deal with this on the front lines right now, and for all the people who've lost their job, all the people who've lost their income, all the people worrying about whether their businesses are going to stay afloat, all the people who frankly aren't going to have a college graduation ceremony, a high school graduation ceremony, all the things that right now are a shock to our collective psyche. The work of the legislature, we are going to be there to try and do everything we can to get people back on their feet onto the other side of this in the best state possible. And so I'm going to sign off on that note. The good news is we've got so many amazing people in this state who are stepping up to help, so that despite what this virus throws at us, we'll be as well positioned on the other side, I think, as any state will be. So thanks, and keep up the great work.